The supply convoy from Velkatha was 3 hours late. Caden Holt noted it in the relay log. Then he went back to panel 3. That was it. That was the whole thing. Someone else's problem on someone else's clock in someone else's sector. He had his own problem. A drift bias in the fourth harmonic that had been sitting inside operating tolerance for 2 weeks like a quiet guest who hadn't quite overstayed their welcome yet. But would. It always did. He'd been chasing it since the last calibration cycle. And he was close. He could feel it the way you feel a word sitting just behind your tongue. Not there yet, but almost. So the convoy was late. Fine. Logged. Moving on. Karath 9 did not care about convoys. Karath 9 did not care about much, honestly. It was a moon with no proper name. The compact had borrowed one from the survey officer who filed the initial assessment, and that officer had apparently been in a considerable hurry because the name told you nothing about the place, nothing about the gray rock. The low scrub that grew in stubborn patches between basalt shelves like it was doing it on principle. The sky that sat at the color of old pewter all day, and then went darker pewter at night. No drama, no gradation, just the same flat light deciding it was done. 5 prefab modules bolted to a shelf of rock, a perimeter fence, a transit shelter, an equipment bay large enough for one mid-size hauler, and the monitoring station which required calibration every 11 days, because the moon's magnetic variance drifted with the tidal cycle and did not apologize for the inconvenience. Caden had been here 6 years, by choice. Every cycle he reread the contract, signed it, and sent it back. No one asked why. He appreciated that more than he could have explained to anyone who asked. He was 44 years old, gray at his temples, a scar on his left forearm where a hydraulic coupling had blown during a platform install 11 years ago. Not here, somewhere else. A different posting, a different kind of work. The breach had caught him on the inside of the forearm. Clean scar now. Old. He did not own a weapon because nothing had ever come to Karath 9 that required one. The posting suited him. The moon's particular quality of quiet suited him. The work was clean and specific and self-contained, and it did not require anything from him that he was not prepared to give, and it did not produce anything he was not able to account for. That was sufficient. The fourth harmonic was the current project. It had been drifting for 2 weeks, still within tolerance, still technically fine, but consistent, and Caden did not leave consistent problems alone. Consistent meant something. Consistent meant the answer was in the measurement somewhere. He was going to find it. He went to the equipment bay at 1847 to pull the coupling wrench from the wall rack. The panel 3 calibration had reached the step that required a physical torque on the secondary junction. The remote tools couldn't reach it, so he'd been putting this off, and he'd put it off long enough that soon had become tonight. He opened the bay door, brought the lights up, heard something shift behind the forward hauler cradle. He stopped. Not an animal. He knew the sounds of Karath 9's animals, small burrowing things that lived in the rock scrub and occasionally got into the perimeter fence sensors and caused alerts that meant nothing. This was not any of them. This sound had intention. This sound had heard the door and made a decision about stillness. Caden stood in the doorway for a moment with the lights on and the coupling wrench in his hand. He said in compact standard, "I'm not going to hurt you." Silence. "You can stay where you are. I'm getting a tool and leaving." A child came out from behind the forward cradle. Small. 9 years old. Caden would learn later, though, the Kelsorn measured years differently, and the conversion gave a number he spent some time being not entirely confident about. She was wearing what had been at some earlier point in the day a traveling robe, copper-colored fabric with black edging at the hem and cuffs. Elegant in construction, the kind of garment that costs something, currently coated in a thorough and democratic layer of Karath 9 dust. Her skin was a warm copper slate, not brown, not gray, but a particular metallic warmth, the color of certain alloys when morning light hits them at exactly the right angle. Her eyes were pale, ice pale, the color of the sky on this moon, just before a weather front comes across the basalt shelf, a blue that does not quite look like blue until the light finds the right angle. And then it is unmistakably blue and very specific and nothing else. She was watching him, not with fear. Not exactly. It was something more disciplined than fear. Fear managed. Fear that had been running hard all day and had been set into a controlled pattern the way you set a system into safe mode when you know you're going to need it functional later. Calm is the absence of fear. What she had was better than that. Caden did not ask questions. He put the coupling wrench on the workbench, reached to the side table where he kept the afternoon supply of field ration packs, and mimed opening one and eating from it. Universal. The child blinked once, slow, deliberate, the blink of someone running an assessment, then gave a single small nod. Caden pointed at the station module door. She followed, staying 2 meters back, far enough to have options, close enough that she'd made a decision. He set food on the galley table and sat down at the far end. She ate. 3 ration packs and half of a fourth, working through them methodically without rushing, without looking at him with anything except that same careful peripheral attention. A child who was afraid and hungry but too disciplined to let the hunger make her incautious. When she was done, she sat back, folded her hands on the table, and looked at him with the ice-pale eyes and waited to find out what he would do next. He showed her the bunk room, pointed at one of the bunks, made a sleeping gesture. She understood that. She sat on the edge of the bunk with her hands folded in her lap and watched him leave with the same contained attention she'd had since she stepped out from behind the cradle. And Caden went back to panel 3. He sat at the monitoring station and ran the calibration sequence as far as he could get, without the coupling wrench step, and tried to think clearly. A child traveling on a supply convoy. Something goes wrong with the convoy that was 3 hours late before it became something else entirely. Child runs, finds a relay station, finds an equipment bay on a catch latch because the maintenance contractor left it open while working on panel 3. Most obvious explanation, no contradicting evidence. He logged it as a working hypothesis, kept one eye on the sensors, and then because the work was still there and the fourth harmonic was still drifting, he kept going. The second day arrived the way days arrived on Karath 9 without ceremony, the pewter sky finding its level and staying there. The wind came off the basalt shelf in the early morning and moved through the scrub in small, unhurried waves. The child found the survey manual. Caden kept 2 copies on the equipment bay's reference shelf. The relay architecture sections got enough use that single copies wore out. He was on his 3rd set of the 1st volume. The child found one of them mid-morning, brought it to her position beside the forward cradle. She had apparently claimed that corner back against the wall sightlines to both doors and opened it across her knees. She couldn't read compact standard. He could see that immediately. The written language produced no response in her face. But the drawings were different. The schematics, the cross-sections, the annotated diagrams showing how the relay architecture fit together, how signal moved through the system, how each component related to the ones around it. Those she could read. Caden stood in the bay doorway for a moment and watched. The child turned pages slowly, went back, held a page up to the overhead light to examine a cross-section detail more closely, tilting it to catch the angle she wanted, set it back down, looked at it for a long time, made some internal decision about it, turned the page. She was working through it the way he worked through a new relay architecture. Start at the beginning. Don't skip. Find the internal logic and follow it before you start asking why. Caden went back to panel 3. He did not comment on the manual. She had found something that made sense to her in a place where nothing else did, and she was using it. That was sufficient. And it was not his business. Twice during the 2nd day, she followed him to the monitoring station without invitation and without announcement. She appeared in the doorway, positioned herself at 2 meters, the careful and consistent measurement she had maintained since the galley table, and observed the calibration work, not hovering, not asking, just watching with the focused quiet of someone who is learning something they intend to keep. Caden ran the calibration. The child watched. No one said anything. It should have been strange. 6 years alone on a moon with no proper name, and suddenly there was a 9-year-old in the doorway watching him work on panel 3's secondary junction, as if it were entirely normal. It wasn't strange. That was the thing he kept coming back to quietly between calculations. It wasn't strange at all. That evening, alone at the monitoring station while the child slept, Caden ran the identification. He'd been putting it off. Not from avoidance, from accuracy. Better information later than incomplete information now. But he had enough to work with. The traveling robe. The material which was not cheap and not common. The cut which spoke of custom work. The way the child carried herself. Straight-backed. Composed. Not performing composure. Having it. Children raised to be small do not hold themselves that way. Children raised to take up exactly the space they are entitled to, no more and no less do. He ran the species identification first. Kelsorn, uncommon in this sector. Political sensitivity classification attached. He ran the political classification. The Kelsorn organized by kin houses. 4 primary houses. The 4th house held sovereign authority over the Kelsorn fleet and the Kelsorn Reach. The 4th house identifier used a copper slate designation in the formal records. Caden looked at that for a moment. Then he looked at the fiber signature scan he'd quietly run on the child's robe during the first meal. Manufacturing origin. Authentication code embedded in the weave. 4th house, sovereign household, child's garment. The convoy was 3 hours late because something had gone wrong with it, and a child from the sovereign household of the Kelsorn 4th house had been hiding in his equipment bay, having entered through a door left on a catch latch while he was working on panel 3. Caden sat very still at the monitoring station for approximately 45 seconds. Then he got up, walked to the equipment bay and checked the lock on the exterior door. Checked the secondary seal. Checked the sensor array on the perimeter fence and confirmed it was running at full sensitivity. He went back to the monitoring station. He did not wake the child. There was nothing to change yet, and changing things without reason was how you created new problems on top of existing ones. But he kept the sensors on. On the 3rd morning, the child told him her name, or something close to it. She pointed at herself and repeated the sound until he had it close enough that the correction stopped. Something near Saya, 2 syllables, the second one shorter than compact standard would typically render it. Saya. Caden said it. She gave a small nod, then pointed at him. Caden. She tried it. First attempt was close. Second was closer. She filed it, moved on. They ate at the galley table. She had decided at some point during the 2nd day that the galley table was acceptable proximity for shared meals, and by the 3rd morning, the 2-meter buffer had compressed to table distance without ceremony or announcement. He did not note this. He poured a 2nd cup of the hot grain drink he'd found on the 2nd morning through the universal method of offering 2 options and watching which produced a reaction, that she preferred it to the standard nutrient-packed beverage, and set it within her reach without making anything of the gesture. Saya picked it up and drank. After breakfast, she went to the monitoring station doorway, stood at her position, waited. Caden was running the 4th harmonic sequence. He had been narrowing the problem for 2 weeks, and he was now confident enough in his hypothesis to begin testing it. The drift was not in the compensation circuit as he'd initially assumed. It was upstream, in the secondary junction mounting. A tolerance issue in the bracket installation, not catastrophic, not yet, but accumulating. The way things accumulated when they were slightly wrong in a specific and repeatable way, when no one caught them. He talked through it. Not a lesson. Not directed at the child. Just the habit of 6 years alone, you say the work out loud sometimes, because hearing it is different from thinking it, and the difference sometimes shows you what you missed. He said the signal knows where it's supposed to go. That's not the problem. The problem is that the path has a bend in it. Small. Consistent. The signal makes it, but it costs something every time. Eventually it costs too much. Saya was watching his face, not the panel. Caden turned back to the calibration sequence. That afternoon he passed through the equipment bay to retrieve a torque driver and paused in the doorway. Saya had the survey manual open to the relay architecture section. She had found a piece of marking compound from the tool shelf and was using it to trace the schematics in the air above the page, not on the page above it, with her finger working through the signal connections in 3 dimensions. She was following signal path, tracking it from transmission point through the relay architecture junction by junction in correct sequence, without having been taught the sequence, without being able to read the notations that labeled it, just from the drawings, just from the logic of how things fit together, followed carefully enough and long enough that the logic revealed itself. Caden stood in the doorway for longer than he'd planned. Then he went back to panel 3 and sat for a moment before the calibration resumed, thinking about what it meant to give someone the reasoning rather than just the result. That night the sensors were quiet. He had filed a preliminary anomaly report to the Compact Coordination Office at Velkatha. Standard protocol. The response had come back in 6 hours. A human coordinator somewhat less composed than the automated system, noting that a response team was being organized. Standard timeline. Not fast, but thorough. He checked the sensors again. Quiet across all ranges. He went to bed. He slept the way he'd slept for 6 years on Karath 9, one level down from fully one level up from gone. The kind of sleep that is really just rest, because maintenance contractors on single-person postings learn quickly that no one is going to watch the sensors while they're not watching the sensors. On the fourth morning, he woke at 600, went to the monitoring station, checked the overnight relay logs. The proximity alert was active. 8 contacts outer envelope, then 14, then 27. Caden stood at the console and watched the count climb with the particular stillness of a person who has just received new information and is calculating what it means before doing anything else. He pulled on his boots and walked to the window that faced the landing approach. The count was past 200 individual signatures, and the sky over Karath 9 was not gray pewter. It was the deep, organized dark of ships. A great many ships in ordered formation descending on an approach pattern that Caden had never seen from this window, had never expected to see, had no frame of reference for, because nothing that required a frame of reference had ever come to Karath 9. The formation was precise. The descent rate was controlled. This was not a supply convoy. This was not a patrol sweep. This was not any configuration that a relay maintenance station on a border moon had occasion to see. This was a statement. He heard a sound behind him. Say was standing at his elbow. Caden had not heard her come in. She was looking at the sky through the monitoring station window, and her expression was not the expression he'd been looking at for 3 days. Not the managed stillness. Not the contained discipline. Something else entirely. Something with weight behind it. The specific recognition of someone seeing a thing they had been expecting to see. Caden said quietly, "Yours." Saya looked up at him and smiled. Small, precise. The smile of someone confirming a fact they were already certain of. She said one word in Kelsorn, a word he had not heard from her before. He did not know it. But he understood it the same way he understood a relay signal that had traveled a very long distance and arrived exactly where it was supposed to be. The ships descended, and Caden stood at the window with a 9-year-old child at his elbow, and felt the particular shift of a very large thing that has been set in motion and is going exactly where it was always going to go. He thought about the convoy. 3 hours late. He thought about the equipment bay door left on the catch latch. He thought about the careful distance a child had maintained at every table, every doorway, the precise measurement of someone who was not sure yet what safety was going to look like, but was keeping enough room to find out. She chose here, he thought. Not the relay station in general, not any structure. This one, this moon, this person, and had waited, and it occurred to him quietly without drama, in the way that true things arrive when you're not looking for them, that he had been waiting too. Not for ships, not for anything so legible as ships, just waiting. 6 years of contracts renewed without question. 6 years of work that was clean and specific and did not require anything he was not already doing. That had been sufficient. It had been sufficient. He looked at the sky full of ships and felt something shift in the back of his chest, somewhere near the place where old accounting lives, and thought maybe sufficient was not the only available measure. Now he understood something he had not understood 3 days ago. The proximity alert had cleared at 22:09 on what now felt like a very long time ago, and then it came back at 22:14 with a different signature entirely. 2 vehicles, no transponder registration, running dark on every standard compact navigation frequency. He had watched the sensor screen for 4 seconds. 4 seconds is a long time when you know what you're looking at. 6 contacts crossed the fence line at 22:14 and 11 seconds. He had 47 seconds. He knew this because he had lived in this station for 6 years, and he knew exactly how long it took to move from the outer fence to the exterior access door at a purposeful pace. He had measured it during quarterly drills. He had thought during those drills that the measurement was academic. He had been wrong about that. He spent 11 of those seconds in the bunkroom doorway. Saya was awake. Of course she was. Children who have spent a full day managing fear do not fall into sleep easily. She was sitting on the edge of the bunk in the dark, hands folded in her lap, exactly as he had left her. Not tense, not panicked, just present, steady. Her eyes found him in the doorway without difficulty, as if they had been pointed that direction for some time. Caden held up one finger. Silence. Then one hand flat palm down. Low. Still, do not move from where I put you. Saya looked at him, not at the gesture, at his face, reading what was there. running her assessment the way she ran every assessment, quickly, completely, without wasted motion. 2 seconds. Then she stood up and came with him to the equipment bay without a word. Caden put her inside, checked that the manual locking mechanism engaged, put his hand flat against the door for one moment, a gesture he hadn't planned that arrived without consultation from whatever part of him was still operating on instinct rather than calculation. Then he turned and walked to the access corridor, the space between the monitoring station and the outer access door. 2 meters wide, 3.5 meters from the outer door to the bulkhead behind him. He knew every dimension. He knew the emergency pressure seal on the outer door frame designed for vacuum events tested during last quarter's drill, rated to hold under sustained force significantly greater than 6 people could apply manually without equipment. He knew the interior lighting controls on the wall panel to his left. He knew the floor, the ceiling, the specific place near the eastern wall where the prefab installation had cut a corner on the structural cross brace, a thing he had noted and scheduled for correction and had not yet corrected. He knew this corridor the way you know something you are responsible for keeping functional. Every hinge, every seal point, every weakness. He picked up the coupling wrench from the workbench where he'd left it when the evening calibration had still been a calibration and not something else. 3/4 meter of dense alloy, built for torque, not for speed, not a weapon. He was clear about what it was. It was what he had. He also had the torque driver from the morning's junction work, and the relay diagnostic kit, which included a voltage discharge tool he had used on 3 previous occasions to test grounding connections, and which would, if placed in contact with bare skin, produce a result he would not recommend to the person receiving it. Not weapons, tools with unanticipated applications. He took his position and waited. The first contact at the outer door came at 22:19. Not loud, not theatrical. A pressure test, the kind that feels for resistance before committing to force. Caden heard it and recognized it for what it was. Someone who had done this before. Someone checking the arithmetic first. He activated the emergency pressure seal. The door frame groaned. The seal held. The pressure test turned into something more sustained. And then after 40 seconds of sustained effort that produced nothing, it stopped. They were recalculating. Good. Recalculation cost time. Time was what he was buying. He adjusted the lighting panel. Not dark would help them, not him. Variable. Cycling in a pattern that looked almost regular but wasn't quite disrupting the spatial reading you did when moving fast through an unfamiliar space. He had been running lighting diagnostics on this panel for 6 years. He knew exactly which settings produced which effect. The second contact came at 22:41. More direct. The outer door held. The pressure seal held. The coupling wrench deployed at a specific angle against the door frame's lower hinge assembly in a way that had nothing to do with its listed applications, and everything to do with Caden's precise knowledge of how that hinge had been installed contributed to the door continuing to hold. 3 of the 6 sensor contacts withdrew across the perimeter fence line before the second hour ended. Caden watched the monitoring station display through the access corridor's small internal window and noted their withdrawal with the attention of someone who knows that fewer is not the same as done. The other 3 stayed. At 23:31, the voice came through the external communications port, calm, even. The voice of someone who had been in situations requiring negotiation and had learned that the calm tone was more effective than the threat tone, more unsettling too in its way, because it implied the person on the other end had enough experience to have developed preferences. "I know you can hear this." Caden could hear it. He said nothing. "I'm not here to complicate your evening. I just need what's in the storage bay. You step back. We're done in 10 minutes. You file your incident report in the morning and collect the damage assessment from the compact. Clean resolution." His name was Crail. Caden would learn this later. Former compact road coordinator dismissed for selling convoy schedule data to parties who found that information commercially useful. He had taken his professional skills and applied them to a field where those skills were equally in demand. He was not a thug. He was a planner. He didn't threaten. He offered arrangements. And when arrangements weren't accepted, he moved to contingencies which he had also planned for. "She's 9 years old," Caden said. One sentence through the door. A pause from the other side. The pause of someone who has heard an answer that doesn't match any of the expected responses and is filing it correctly. "She's a political asset in a negotiation that doesn't involve you. She's in my equipment bay." Another pause, slightly longer. "That," Crail said, "is a temporary situation." "Yes," Caden said, "it is." He stepped back from the door. The corridor was 3.5 meters long. He was in the middle, which was exactly where he intended to remain. Krail moved to contingencies. The third contact came at 0017 from the western ventilation access. Caden had known it was coming, not because he was prescient, because he had spent 6 years noting every structural point in these modules, including the western ventilation shaft that bypassed the main corridor and connected the exterior maintenance panel to the equipment bay antechamber. He had put it on the repair schedule 18 months ago. Not yet corrected, he got to the ventilation antechamber 38 seconds before they did. What he did there he recorded in his personal maintenance notes, rather than the station incident log. The voltage discharge tool was involved. The rated applications of the voltage discharge tool did not include what he used it for. He thought the manufacturer would understand given the context. He thought more honestly that they probably wouldn't. He went back to the corridor. His hands were not entirely steady. Not from fear. From the sustained, constant grip of the coupling wrench over the previous 2 hours, and the ventilation access work and everything before it, all of it accumulating in ways that hands accumulate things over a long night. He shifted the wrench slightly, adjusted his grip. The corridor was still 3.5 meters long. The door was still closed. Those were the relevant facts. He went back to his position. At 1:47, Krail spoke through the external port again. "You understand this doesn't change the outcome." Caden said, "I understand that you think that." A pause. "You're a relay technician. Maintenance contractor," he said. "There's a difference. You don't have a weapon." "I have a corridor," he said, "and the door is still closed." A long pause. Then silence. He went back to waiting. At 2:53 he heard it. From the equipment bay. Through the bulkhead. Through the insulation in the prefab wall and the 2 meters of station structure between the corridor and the bay. One knock. Pause. 3 knocks. He went very still. Not random. Not distress. A question. Precise. Deliberate. The question of someone who had been sitting in near darkness for 4 hours and had decided that sitting in silence indefinitely was less useful than knowing. Someone who had thought about how to ask without making noise that would travel beyond the walls she needed it not to travel beyond. Someone who was 9 years old and still had more composure than most people Caden had met under comfortable circumstances. He moved to the corridor wall closest to the equipment bay, put his hand flat against the surface. One knock. A pause that was almost too long. And then from the other side of the wall in the dark and the near silence, 3 knocks back. Caden closed his eyes for exactly 2 seconds. He had not been a man given to ceremony. He was not going to start now. There was a corridor to maintain and a door to keep closed, and neither of those things had changed. But he stood with his hand against the wall for a moment longer than he needed to, feeling the faint warmth of the insulated surface, the faint solidity of it. Someone on the other side of that wall in the dark had just told him she was still there. "I know," he thought. "I'm still here too." He went back to his position. The remaining 3 contacts held through 0300, through 0330, through the 4th attempt, a sustained effort on the outer door seal that lasted 19 minutes and produced a stress fracture in the outer frame coupling that Caden noted for the damage assessment report he was already composing in the back of his mind. Outer door frame coupling replacement required. 2 corridor wall panels with burn scoring resurfacing needed. 1 relay diagnostic kit used beyond listed applications. Replacement required. He itemized it while he held the corridor. It helped. The math of damage assessment was not so different from the math of relay calibration. You accounted for what had been used. You noted what would need to be corrected. You put everything on the list. The 3 remaining contacts withdrew at 0414. All at once. Clean. Krail making a decision, and the unit responding without discussion. The professional efficiency of people who have worked together long enough to move on the call. Caden watched the display. He did not move. He stood in the corridor for 20 more minutes. Not because he wasn't sure, because he had learned from 6 years of maintenance work from the specific lesson of things that fail gradually, rather than all at once. That certainty arrived slower than you wanted it to. The correct response to being wrong about how long something takes was to add time, not subtract it. He added 20 minutes. Then he walked to the equipment bay door and unlocked it. Saya was sitting in the same position he had left her, back against the wall beside the forward hauler cradle. Knees drawn up, hands resting loosely on her knees, not gripped, not tense, but present. Her eyes found him the moment the door opened before he had crossed the threshold. She had been in that space for 6 hours. in near darkness, listening to whatever had traveled through the bulkhead from the corridor, the pressure variations, the contact sounds, the vibration of forces applied to surfaces designed to resist them. And she had been exactly as quiet as he had asked her to be. Not approximately, exactly, which had required something Caden did not have a simple word for. Because being still in the dark while things happened on the other side of a wall was not just quiet. It was a choice made continuously for 6 hours by someone who could have made a different choice at any point. She had not. Caden crossed to her. Crouched down to her level, his knees had opinions about corridors and crouching after several hours of both, and looked at her. He said, "It's done. They're gone." Saya looked at him. Her eyes moved across his face with complete attention, not searching for reassurance, reading what was there. Measuring it against what she had worked out from the sounds through the wall, from the vibrations, from the quality of silence that had finally settled and held. Then she said something in Kelsorn, short, soft, certain, not a question. The register of someone who has done their own accounting and arrived at the same number. Two people who have been solving the same problem from different sides of a wall, who have just compared answers, and whose answers match. Caden nodded. Saya nodded back. He would think about that for a while afterward. Not what he had done in the corridor, but what she had done in the bay, which in some ways required more. On the morning that followed, technically the second day though, it felt like a continuation of the same long night. Pushed past a number on the clock, Caden filed the incident report. The jamming signal had cleared by 6. He sent it at 6:14. 6 contacts, 2 light vehicles. No transponder registration, sustained approach from 22:14 to 04:14, withdrawal achieved without station penetration. Equipment damage itemized. Presence of an unaccompanied minor species. Kelsorn, approximate age 9, currently in good health. The automated acknowledgement came back in 40 minutes. A human coordinator from Velkatha came back in 4 hours, tone somewhat less composed than the automated system. A response team was being organized, standard timeline. Caden told them the child had eaten approximately 3.5 ration packs, was in good health as far as he could assess, and had taken up residence in the equipment bay, beside the forward cradle, with a compact relay system survey manual that she appeared to find worthwhile, despite not reading compact standard. This was accurate. The third day arrived without ceremony. Inside the station, something had shifted. Caden was not sure exactly when. Maybe in the moment Saya had stepped out from behind the forward cradle and made a choice about whether to trust the man in the doorway. Saya no longer maintained a measured buffer. She moved through the station with the ease of someone who had taken a precise measurement of the space and would not need to take it again. She appeared in doorways without announcement. On the third morning, she had located the small hot plate in the galley alcove and prepared the grain drink without being asked. 2 cups at the proportion she had observed was preferred, set on the table without comment. Caden picked up his cup, did not comment. After breakfast, Saya returned to the survey manual, which she had moved by this point, from the equipment bay to the secondary console in the monitoring station. She had found a marking stylus somewhere. She was making small notations in the margins, not writing. She still couldn't read compact standard, but diagrams of her own rendered in miniature beside the printed ones, comparing them, checking her derived understanding against the source. Caden glanced over once, then again. The miniature diagrams were accurate, not approximately. The signal architecture derived from the cross-sections, from the dimensional annotations, from the internal logic of how the components related to each other in physical space, gotten right. Without the labels. Without anyone showing her, just from looking at the drawings long enough and carefully enough that the logic revealed itself. He had the sudden specific feeling of looking at something he recognized. The particular quality of mind that does not need to be shown, that needs only to be given the information and the time and will arrive at the understanding by its own route. He knew that quality. He had built 6 years of maintenance work on it. He went back to panel 3. In the afternoon, Saya followed Caden to the monitoring station and said something in Kelsorn and pointed at the panel. Caden said, "Calibration. Making sure the signal goes where it needs to go at the strength it needs to get there." Say considered this. Then she pointed at herself. "Saya," he said. She pointed at him. "Caden." She tried it. Close. She had been close since the second day. They went back to their respective work. That was sufficient. And it occurred to him, sitting at the monitoring station with the fourth harmonic settling toward resolution, and a 9-year-old annotating a survey manual at the next console, That sufficient was doing something different than it usually did. Usually it was an endpoint. Tonight it felt more like a door left open. He did not examine that too closely. He went back to the calibration. Now the ships were here. The fourth morning. The sky had changed from pewter to organized dark, and the count had climbed past 200 on the sensor display, and Saya had been at his elbow before he'd even crossed to the window, already smiling, already certain. The first ground units came through the perimeter fence at 0723. Copper dark armor over black underlayer. 4-point formation around the station, precise and unhurried. Not threatening, just present. Thorough. Caden stood at the transit shelter doorway and watched them arrive. Noted. Filed. Assessed. The ship that set down on the Karath 9 landing pad was not the largest in the fleet. A deliberate choice, he could see it in every line of the hull in the economy of its design. Scale was available. Scale had been declined on principle. Everything about the ship communicated that it knew exactly what it was, and what it was did not require demonstration. The ramp descended. She came down it. Caden would try later to find the right words for this. He would not entirely succeed. Tall. Copper slate skin, the same metallic warmth as Saya's, but deeper. The way a characteristic intensifies across a generation, the way a signature becomes more itself when it has been carried longer. Close-cropped black hair. A single threading of gold at her left temple, thin and precise, the Kelsorn mark of a sovereign house in active command. Ice-pale eyes, the same blue that didn't look like blue until the light found it, and then was nothing else. She was wearing travel practical armor. The armor of someone who had been moving hard and fast for 4 days because stopping had not been among the available choices. There was a mark on the left vambrace, something personal placed there for reasons that were not decorative. She reached the bottom of the ramp. Her boots met the gray rock of Karath 9. And the face that composed, held precisely managed face, did something very small. Something in the set of the jaw. The nearly invisible movement of a person who has been holding a very large feeling at a managed distance for 4 days, and has just seen the reason the feeling is large. Saya went down the station steps at something near a run. She wasn't running. She was moving at the fastest pace consistent with the dignity she had apparently decided to maintain. But her feet were finding the steps faster than usual, and her hands were not folded, and the careful distance she maintained from everyone and everything was simply gone. Saren dropped to one knee on the landing pad. One knee, on the gray rock, in the travel practical armor. Bringing herself to her daughter's height, she held Saya with both arms for a long moment. Not the brief embrace of formal reunion. The long, complete private kind, the kind that happens to occur in front of witnesses because waiting was no longer possible. The wind came off the basalt shelf. The landing operations of 200 ships continued across the perimeter. The court formation held its position. None of it was as loud as that silence. Then Saren held Saya back at arm's length and looked at her. The look of someone conducting a very careful accounting of something they had been afraid they would not be able to account for. Saya looked back. Patient. Steady. The ice-pale eyes that had been steady in the equipment bay, steady at the galley table, steady in the darkness behind the hauler. Cradle steady here too, on a landing pad with a fleet at her back, and her mother's hands on her shoulders. And then she started talking. Not a summary, not a diplomatic condensed account. The complete version. In the register of a child who has decided that the person in front of her deserves the whole truth. Saren listened without interrupting. She listened for a long time. Caden had not moved from the transit shelter doorway. He was wearing his standard maintenance kit. Work trousers, station jacket, the left forearm scar visible where he had rolled the sleeve back during the morning's calibration work and not yet rolled it down. The relay torque driver in his hand. He had been in the middle of the panel 3/4ly check when the proximity alert went active and had not put it down before coming to see what was filling the sky. He looked at the torque driver, then at the court formation on the landing pad, then at the torque driver again. There was probably a version of this moment in which a person set the torque driver down before the sovereign of an interstellar house crossed the landing pad toward them. There was probably a version where they'd also rolled their sleeve back down. He kept the torque driver, left the sleeve where it was. He had been using it this morning. It was what he had in his hand. Saren walked across the landing pad alone. She stopped 2 meters from Caden. The court formation had gone very still behind her, not merely waiting, but attending. A young officer stepped forward from the edge of the formation and positioned himself just off Saren's shoulder. The Sovereign Queen Saren Vel of the Fourth House, commanding the fleet of the Kelsorn Reach, asks permission to address you. Caden said yes. The translator relayed it. Saren spoke. Her voice was low, direct. She asks your name. Caden Holt, Compact Relay Maintenance Contractor, Kareth 9. That was relayed. A pause, not the pause of translation, but the pause of consideration. She asks what you used. Caden looked at the torque driver in his hand, then up at the Queen. A coupling wrench, a torque driver, a relay diagnostic kit. The translator relayed this, a longer pause. In the court formation behind Saren, something changed. Not disruption, not noise. The attending stillness shifted the way a quiet room shifts when something arrives in it that the room had not prepared for. One of the 8 armored personnel said something under their breath. The translator did not render it. Saren said nothing for a moment. Her eyes were on Caden. She asks why. Caden looked at the transit shelter doorway behind him, then at the Queen. She was in my equipment bay. She was 9 years old and she was alone. He stopped, because that was the whole answer. There was no complicated calculation underneath it. There had been a child in his equipment bay. The child had been 9 years old. The door had been there. That was the arithmetic, complete. The translator relayed it. Saren was quiet for longer than the translation required. The Queen says, the translator began, then stopped. Began again with a different quality of care. She says a man who holds a corridor alone for 6 hours with a coupling wrench and a decision. My court has no category for this. A pause. A registry of honors was built for soldiers. Another pause. The translator's voice was deliberate now. She says she has been trying to find the right form since the convoy report reached her fleet 4 days ago. She has not found it. Caden said, you don't need to find a form. Your daughter is safe. Saren caught the word before the translation arrived. Safe. Short. Unambiguous. The kind of word that moves faster than its translation. Something happened in her face, brief, small, the movement of something held at managed distance finally making contact with the surface. It lasted approximately 2 seconds. Then the composure returned, but settled now, not maintained. The difference between a thing held in place and a thing at rest. She says her daughter would agree. Saren spoke again, more weight behind it. She says a debt is a debt. A Kelsorn house does not leave its debts in a relay station on a border moon. It isn't a debt, Caden said. Saren understood that before the translation. Her chin lifted slightly, a very small movement, and she said something brief and precise. The translator, she says, then call it a preference. Caden almost laughed. He didn't, but it was close. The specific involuntary reaction of recognizing a mind working at a particular speed and watching it work. He should have expected that. He was beginning to understand exactly where Saya had learned to think. Saren turned her head and said something to the court formation. The formation shifted. Saya came forward and took her place at her mother's right side. She was carrying the relay system survey manual. She had taken it when she ran to meet her mother on the landing pad, had apparently considered this entirely unremarkable and had not mentioned it. Caden looked at the manual, at Saya. Saya looked back at him with the patient, precise attention she had given everything for 4 days and said something short and certain in Kelsorn. The register of a child stating a fact she has already decided is not in question. Saren returned her attention to Caden. She stood straight, chin level, and when she spoke this time, she spoke to him directly in Kelsorn, her eyes not leaving his, and then stopped and waited, and the translator's voice came in beside her, careful and exact. Caden Holt, Compact Relay Maintenance Contractor. You held a door for 6 hours for a child you did not know with tools that were built to maintain relay panels. A pause, because she was in your care, and you had decided that was sufficient. A pause. My house has been searching for the right word for 4 days. A longer pause. My daughter gave it to me on the landing pad. The translator stopped, started again. The word in Kelsorn is Velsornath. It does not translate exactly into Compact Standard. The closest rendering is a person who was the right person to be present in the right place, and who did not require a reason for that beyond the fact of it. A pause. The Queen says she does not give Velsornath to soldiers. She gives it to the people her soldiers would have needed, if her soldiers had been there. Another pause. She says she is addressing you before her court because the Velsornath carries a right under Kelsorn sovereign law, and she is exercising that right now, in this form. On this ground, the translator's voice was precise when he continued, she is offering you a sovereign bond. A formal bond of house and personal recognition entered in the Kelsorn Sovereign Registry and recorded in the fleet's permanent record. This is not a political alliance. It is not a treaty. It is a personal offer from a sovereign to a person her house names Velsernath, and it carries with it a permanent acknowledgement in the fourth house record that cannot be revoked or diminished. A pause. She says she has commanded the Kelsorn fleet for 11 years. She has never made this offer before. The longest pause. She says her court is assembled on this landing pad because the form of the Velsernath bond requires a witnessed public offer under Kelsorn law, and she is following the form correctly. And then quiet. Careful. She says she is also asking you. The court formation was completely still. 200 ships held the sky above Karath 9. Saya stood at her mother's right side with the survey manual under her arm and her ice-pale eyes on Caden. The same patient, precise attention she had given everything for 4 days. Waiting to see what he would do. Not anxious. Not uncertain. Waiting the way she waited for everything, with the specific confidence of someone who had already run the assessment and believed in the result. Caden looked at Sarenvel, and he thought about the corridor. He thought about 2214, and the 47 seconds, and the equipment bay door, and the 6 hours in which the door had not been the thing he was defending. The door had been the reason he was defending it, which was a different thing entirely. He thought about the coupling wrench, and the torque driver, and the relay diagnostic kit. About the 20 minutes he had stood in the corridor after the last sensor contact cleared, adding time rather than subtracting it, because that was how you got the accounting right. He thought about the hand against the wall. 1 knock, 3 knocks back. He thought about what that actually was when you wrote it plainly. A 44-year-old relay maintenance contractor on a posting, nobody named properly standing in a 2-meter corridor with a coupling wrench and a decision. And a 9-year-old child on the other side of a wall in the near dark, conducting her own version of the same accounting, and arriving at the same number. He thought I did not do any of it because of a calculation about whose life was worth what, in exchange for what. I did it because she was in my equipment bay. She was 9 years old, and the door was there. That was the complete arithmetic, start to finish. Yes, Caden said. The translator relayed it, and something happened in Sarenvel's face. Small, not large, but real. The first thing Caden had seen in that composed, held, precisely managed face that was not being held at any distance at all. It arrived on the surface without management. It lasted approximately 2 seconds. Then the composure came back. Settled now. The difference between a thing maintained and a thing at rest. From the court formation came a sound, not words. Not a formal declaration. A low rhythmic sound from several hundred people in organized formation, practiced enough to be unified, specific enough to be unmistakable. Caden did not know what it was. He would ask the translator later. He would tell him the Kelsorn acknowledgement for a Velsernath bond confirmed. The sound that means yes, and means it was the right answer, and means the House will remember this. The formal documentation was completed on the landing pad of Karath 9. The translator officer produced the record forms. Sarenvel signed with the mark of the Fourth House Sovereign, not the administrative seal used for fleet orders and treaty documents, but a different mark. Personal. Reserved for house bonds rather than political instruments. Caden signed in Compact Standard. A copy was made for the Compact Relay Registry at Velkatha. Saya watched the process with the full focused attention she had given the relay calibrations. When it was done, the court formation gave the sound again. Saya, from her position at her mother's right side, said the word she had said when the ships filled the sky. The same word. Caden still did not know it, but he was learning the shape of it. That evening, word came that Krail and 2 members of his unit had been apprehended by Kelsorn advance scouts within 6 hours of their withdrawal from Karath 9. The Queen's Court provided the Compact Response Team with a complete operational profile of the faction approach trajectory data. Identification known associates information, significantly more thorough than anything the Compact's own border intelligence had on file. The Compact coordinator, when he arrived to process the incident report, looked somewhat overwhelmed for most of the process. Caden understood the feeling. On the morning the fleet prepared to depart, Saya came to the equipment bay for the last time. She stood beside the forward hauler cradle for a moment. The spot where Caden had first seen her. The place she had been for 6 hours in the near dark. She looked at it with the same complete attention she gave everything, acknowledging it. The specific way you look at a place that has been important before you close the door on it. Then she came to where he was standing, said something in Kelsorn. I don't know that word, Caden said. Say considered him. Then she held up the survey manual, pointed at the relay panel on the far wall. The secondary junction. The fourth harmonic compensation circuit. You're taking that with you, he said. A nod. Then something more in Kelsorn, and then slowly, deliberately, one word at a time in compact standard. Words she had apparently been storing for this specific use, working on them for 3 days without announcing the project. You teach more. Caden looked at her. This 9-year-old child who had stepped out from behind a hauler cradle and spent 3 days annotating relay architecture schematics and conducting an independent structural analysis of Panel 3's fourth harmonic compensation circuit and learning to make grain drink at exactly the right proportion. Who had spent 6 hours in the dark being precisely as quiet as she was asked to be, and had found a way to ask through a wall whether the person on the other side was still there. Who had given a complete and unabridged account on a landing pad to a sovereign who was also her mother and had included everything, and had held the survey manual the entire time, who was looking at him now with the patient certainty of someone who has decided this is a reasonable thing to expect, and is stating it plainly. Because why wouldn't she? Yes, Caden said, I will. Saya gave him the small, precise smile. Then she turned and walked out of the equipment bay with the survey manual under her arm, and that was that. The Queen came last. The court formation had begun its return to the ships. The 8 armored personnel were positioned at a respectful distance, present without being intrusive, a skill this entire organization had developed to an unusual degree. Saren Vel came to the transit shelter doorway alone and stopped. She spoke and the translator rendered it. She says the Velsurnath bond will be registered today under the 4th house record with today's date, and Karath 9 as the location of bond. A pause. She says the 4th house does not find cause to apologize for where its records are made. Another pause. She says she will send a formal document of recording to the Compact Relay Maintenance Registry at Velkatha for your records. The translator's voice was careful, so that your registry knows what our registry says. A pause, and then precisely, she asks me to convey this exactly. She says she has commanded the Kelsorn fleet for 11 years. In 11 years, she has never been required to ask. She says she found it. He paused. She says she found it was the better form. Caden looked at her. Saren Vel was looking back, and what was in her eyes now was not managed distance. It was the settled quality that had arrived after yes, and had not gone anywhere since. Caden said she was in my equipment bay. She was 9 years old and she was alone. There was still only one answer to that. The translator relayed it. Saren listened, then said something brief, very quiet. She says yes, that is the word. She inclined her head once. Not a bow. Not a formality performed for witnesses. The specific thing a Kelsorn sovereign does when 2 people have arrived at the same place by different roads, and the roads no longer matter. Then she went back up the ramp. The fleet departed at 1340 local. Caden stood outside the transit shelter and watched 200 ships climb the gray sky of Karath 9. Watched the pewter absorb them one by one, and then in groups, and then all at once, until the sensors showed clear across every range, and the sky was the same color it had always been. Edge to edge. Uninterrupted in every direction. He went inside. He sat at the galley table with a cup of hot grain drink made at the proportion he had learned from watching a 9-year-old prepare it without being asked. He sat there for a while. Then he went to the equipment bay and stood beside the forward hauler cradle for a moment, looked at the wall where the faint trace of someone sitting with their back against it for 6 hours was still just barely visible. Then he went to the monitoring station and completed the Panel 3 quarterly calibration that the proximity alert had interrupted 7 hours ago. The 4th harmonic drift resolved on the 2nd adjustment, secondary junction mounting. The bracket installation. The tolerance issue he had been chasing for 2 weeks, accumulating in the way things accumulate when they are slightly wrong in a specific and repeatable way. He had known it was there. He had been narrowing toward it. The signal ran clean. He filed the completed maintenance log and calibration results with the compact relay system. The automated acknowledgement came back in 40 seconds. 30 minutes after that, a priority message from the Velkatha Coordination Office asking him to confirm the details of the Velsurnath bond as they appeared in the relay registry. He confirmed them. The Coordination Office's response took longer than administrative acknowledgement required. In the third paragraph, it noted that Karath 9 had been upgraded to a Class 2 compact facility effective immediately. A second module, a communications array that did not require 11-day recalibration for magnetic variance drift, and a maintenance assistant posting available if he chose to fill it. He replied that the second module and communications array were appreciated. The assistant posting was conditional pending further review. 3 weeks later, a message arrived through the Kelsorn diplomatic courier channel, addressed to Caden Holt, compact relay maintenance contractor, Karath 9, written in Kelsorn with a compact standard translation appended, containing 17 questions, specific, sequenced, about fourth harmonic drift analysis, about the relationship between secondary junction mounting tolerance and harmonic compensation accuracy, about the theoretical maximum calibration interval achievable with a magnetic variance profile matching Karath 9's specific tidal drift pattern. The questions were precise. They were ordered in the sequence that made sense if you had been working through the survey manual systematically from the relay architecture section forward, building the understanding from the foundation, not arriving at the application without understanding the structure beneath it. Attached to the final page below the 17th question was a drawing made by someone working from observation. The particular quality of line that comes from careful looking. The line of someone who has looked at a thing long enough that the line is faithful to it. It depicted the relay panel 3 secondary junction in cross-section. The fourth harmonic compensation circuit was annotated in a hand that was small and exact, and that Caden recognized without needing to think about it, because he had watched that hand hold a survey manual up to the overhead light to examine a cross-section detail more closely. He had watched it trace diagrams in the air. He had watched it make miniature notations in margins without being asked, checking a derived understanding against the source. The drawing was accurate, not approximately, completely. Caden sat at the monitoring station for a long time after he read it. Then he got up, made a cup of grain drink, sat back down, and wrote back. He answered all 17 questions as completely as he could, which took considerably longer than the questions themselves, because the answers required context. Because a relay answer without the reasoning underneath it was just a procedure. And procedures only held until the next situation they hadn't been written for. He knew this from 6 years on a moon with magnetic variance drift that did not stay still and did not apologize for the inconvenience. He wrote the reasoning as well as the result. The why underneath the what. The way the system behaved and why it behaved that way and what that meant for the next question that would inevitably need to be asked. He noted in the answer to the 17th question that the fourth harmonic drift on panel 3 had resolved cleanly on the most recent calibration, that the signal as of that morning's verification run was clean. He thought Saya would understand what that meant. The drawing told him she would. He sent the response through the diplomatic channel and went back to the monitoring station. Outside, the sky of Karath 9 was the same pewter it had always been. The wind came off the basalt shelf and moved through the low scrub and asked nothing of anyone. The perimeter sensors were clear. The relay signal ran at full strength, reaching every destination it was supposed to reach at exactly the strength required. The fourth harmonic held, and Caden Holt sat at his console and began drafting the next calibration cycle's maintenance notes. Specific, honest, accounting for everything the way he always had, the way someone else eventually was going to learn to do if you gave them the reasoning, not just the result. If you trusted them with the why underneath the what, and gave them the time to follow it where it led. That he had learned was how you sent a signal that arrived where it was supposed to arrive. Not just once, but every time after.